Hi, and welcome to this lesson, the next in our series, as we introduce ourselves to Spring Boot. And this one focuses on the V portion of MVC Views, and in particular, how to use the Thymeleaf template engine to create views within Spring Boot. So before we get into the specifics and some of the details, let's revisit our MVC flow diagram. This is the diagram we've looked at a few times in the past. And so far, we've looked at the controller, the center portion, the blue portion there, and how we can handle web requests at the controller, HTTP requests. We've also looked at how to configure routing, which is how the framework and the application server get a request to a specific controller method or a specific handler method. And so we've looked at those two pieces so far. And so what we've yet to integrate are the portions at the top left and the top right, the model and the database, and the view. In this lesson, we start looking at the view, and this will take 2 or 3 separate lessons for us to get to the point where we've got all of the kind of fundamentals of views in Thymeleaf and in Spring Boot under our belts, but that's the objective today. All right, so I'm going to exit this presentation, and for this next series of lessons, we're going to work on an application together, so please do follow along with me here. We're going to not only use this application in the lesson videos, but we'll use it from time to time to practice and to learn some new things in class as part of in-class studios. So please be sure that you're following along and that you're kind of making sure you keep up with this stuff. Feel free to pause the video or to rewind to make sure that you're able to code along and do everything that we do here on the screen. So I've gone to start.spring.io in my web browser, okay? And this is a site we visited before, and it's a site that just gives you a nice way to generate a simple template for a Spring Boot project. So I've already kind of set things up here. Make sure that you select Gradle project. We're going to use Gradle, and recall Gradle is what will help us do a few things, but in particular dependency management for managing external libraries that our project will use. And under group, enter org.launchcode or your own domain in reverse there if you want to use your own, if you have a personal domain. Under artifact, enter cheese-MVC. This application we're going to work on is going to be an application to just create and manage lists of cheeses that we like. So enter cheese-MVC. The artifact name here, the convention is to use all lowercase with a hyphen to separate words, so that's a little bit different than a lot of other conventions in Java. And under dependencies, we want web, DevTools, and Thymeleaf. So you can select these from the dependencies drop down by just starting to type each, and they'll come and show up there in the drop down, and you can select DevTools, Thymeleaf, and web. Those are the 3 that we'll need for this project. Then hit generate project, and you'll get a download of a zip file. Going to go ahead and open that zip file, unpack it. And what we're going to do now is make sure we move this to a reasonable place. So I'm going to put this where I've been working on projects for this unit. You should put it wherever you've been storing your code for LC101. I've got my LC101 folder. I'm just going to move it right over there. Okay, so we're good. So let's go ahead and fire up IntelliJ now. And we're going to import this project. So we don't want to create a new project. That would be if we were working on, wanting to create something fresh without any existing files. In this case, we actually do have some files in a project template. So let's select import project. There we have cheese-MVC. It's already selected. Yours probably won't be. Make sure that you find the right folder to select, hit open. And here we want to go ahead and select import project from external model. We're using a Gradle project, and so we want to go ahead and let IntelliJ do the work to incorporate the Gradle workflow and some of those processes into our project. So go ahead and select that and hit next. And then on the next screen, make sure that auto import is checked. It may or may not be checked for you. And everything else should be good. Go ahead and say use default Gradle wrapper as well. That's an option that we want to use. And let's see, that looks good. Let's go ahead and hit finish. And as this project is created by IntelliJ, It's going to do a lot of stuff. Notice here at the bottom, it looks like Gradle's doing a bunch of work. And right now it looks like it's going to go fetch some dependencies for us. I'll show you exactly what those dependencies are so you can get a sense of the work that Gradle is doing for us. So go ahead and drop down the arrow on the top level of your project and open up your build.gradle file. Okay, so again, a lot of stuff in here that we're not going to be concerned with at this point, but if you go to the bottom, you see the dependencies section, and there are 4 dependencies, and the first part of this of each dependency specifies which portion of our project's cycle or life cycle this should apply to, this dependency should apply to. So the first 2 are compile time dependencies. That means that these first 2 are going to be part of the compiled code generated by Gradle when we run our projects. Okay. Runtime, this dependency is going to exist with our application and be available to our application while it's running within the Tomcat server. And this one is for testing, which we're not concerned with at this point. So these are just to indicate these are libraries. These are bundles of Java classes that are available publicly on the internet via the Maven Central repository. We see that Maven Central is listed right above. There are other places that you could use for repositories. Maven Central is one of the most common and one of the largest. And so these are dependencies that Gradle knows about, and it knows furthermore where to go get them based on the configuration of Maven Central. It knows where those servers are, and based on the information here, it knows exactly which Java libraries to pull in. If you want to see what's actually in some of those Java libraries, you can. They're not really hidden from you. They're right here in your project under external libraries. So if you unfold that window, you will see a large number of items. These are all packages that have been pulled in, formerly jars actually. So a jar is short for Java Archive, the .jar file format. And they're basically zip files of Java classes. So you can actually dig down inside of these and see what's inside of each of these jars. We're working with Thymeleaf, so let's go ahead and look at, just see what's down in there. So you can see that there's an org Thymeleaf package and an org Thymeleaf Spring 4. And so these are all going to be Java classes that are used by our application when we're using Thymeleaf. So yeah, just interesting stuff and fun to poke around in. We're not going to expect you to kind of know the ins and outs of Gradle and how all of this stuff works in detail, but we do want you to know that Gradle is doing some work for you to pull in external libraries, and we want to kind of pull back those curtains as much as we can at this point in the class. Okay, so let's go ahead and look in our source folder, source main Java, and we recall that source main Java is where we store the Java code, the Java class files for our project, and we have one package within there already, org.launchcode, and it has our cheese MVC application class there. And so like last time, we're going to go ahead and create a new package called controllers. Whoops, I created a new Java file. Let me go ahead and delete that. That was unintentional. Create new package. There we go. All right, and within our controllers file, let's create a new controller. So just select the Java class, and I'm going to call this cheese controller. Okay, and like last time, we need to add an annotation to this to make sure that Spring recognizes it as a controller. So @controller does the trick. And let's see, let's also go in here and make just a single method just so we can have something to test our view out with. So I'm going to make a public method that returns a string. I'm going to call it index. And for now, we'll just have it return, say, my cheese. And I'm going to make this, I'm going to add the request mapping annotation to configure the route to this. And we use value to specify the route that at which requests should be mapped to this handler. And then one more thing I'm going to do is add the response body. So we've gone through these mechanics in a previous lesson, but I want to just go through them again here to set some basic stuff up before we can actually work with views. Okay, great. So that should work. This actually will function as a basic web application, and it'll just return a single response. I'm going to go ahead and run it. So the first time I run a new application, you're going to have to go over to the Gradle panel, and within tasks, find the boot run task, tasks in the application folder there. And then after you run it the first time, it'll show up here in your run configurations, and you can use the run button or the debug button. All right, now the Tomcat is up and running. Let's go look at what we've got in our browser. So you can browse to localhost :8080, and we see our message there. And so we know that our application is, at least in a minimal sense, up and running. Okay, so I'm going to go back to IntelliJ here, stop my application, and get the run panel out of the way. All right, so now I want to just see how we can actually add just the most basic template. So rather than having this string, my cheese, returned from our index method, let's look at how we can put that into a template and have our controller method pass control to a view. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a couple of things. The first is I need to have a place to put my templates. And so we mentioned very briefly in passing last time that the resources folder here has a templates directory in which we can put our templates. So that's exactly where we want to put them. I'm just going to right click here and say new. And here I want to create an HTML file. So our templates are going to be using a syntax, a template engine called Thymeleaf. And Thymeleaf templates actually just have the same extension as HTML files do. And in a lot of ways are very similar to HTML files. They're kind of an extension of HTML. And we'll say a little bit more about what that means in a second. But go ahead and click there. And since this one corresponds to the index view, I'm going to call this index.html. Okay, and so we get just a plain HTML file that is generated from a template that IntelliJ has. IntelliJ doesn't really know that we want to use this as a Thymeleaf template, so it's going to give us just a plain HTML template. However, there are a couple things that we want to do here. So in particular, I want to go up to the HTML tag, and I want to add, an attribute. So I want to add this, let me go ahead and type it out, XML ns:/th. That attribute equals this URL. So XMLNS:/th equals, in quotes, http://www.thymeleaf.org. So what this is doing is this is using a feature of what's called XML or XHTML, which is kind of a version of HTML that incorporates elements of the XML language. And so this will actually pull in some information about the tags that we're about to use that are part of Thymeleaf. Okay, so this will allow for things like syntax highlighting and error reporting and things like that within IntelliJ, because this tells IntelliJ that the file we're trying to use should conform to the Thymeleaf extension of XHTML or of HTML. Okay. And in particular, when we do this, we are essentially, one thing that we're doing as a side effect of this is inscribing stricter standards on our HTML. In particular, look at this meta tag right here. If I tried to render this template as a Thymeleaf template, I would get an exception in my server because the syntax doesn't meet the XHTML standard, which says that all tags must be closed. So that means, in this case, I need to just go ahead and add a self-closing slash to this meta tag. So just something to be aware of. That's something that can happen and can be a bit of a gotcha when you're working with Thymeleaf templates to start, because we're often used to in HTML5 a little bit of a looser set of rules around tags and whether or not they must be closed. Okay, so here, now I'm going to put something in the body of my template. All right, so what I want to do is I want to put an H1 and I want to put just the title of my site. All right, my cheese. Now, to get this handler to then pass control to the view, I need to do a couple of things. So we mentioned in passing in the first lesson or two that response body allows our controller method to return text directly from the controller method, from the handler. And so instead of doing that now, I'm going to want to pass control to a view or a template, so I need to remove this response body annotation. Okay. Furthermore, I need to tell Spring which template I want it to render by giving it the name of the template. Okay, so notice that this is just index. It's not index.html. I don't give it the file name. I give it the template name, and the template name corresponds to just the front part of that file name, before the dot and the file extension. Okay, so that's the template name that we're going to render. Okay, so let's go ahead and just test out this small change. It's always good to frequently test your changes by making some changes, running your application, and making sure that it works rather than making large groups of changes at once. So let's go ahead and put that idea in practice here. Our application has started up. Let's go to the browser. And if everything's great, then we'll see the same message, but now it's in an H1 tag, so it looks a little bit different. So now we know that this change we just made actually rendered this template index.html. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop our server and let's do a few things here. Let's notice that I didn't have to give it, again, I'm leaving off the .html here because I'm giving it the name of a template and not a file, but I also didn't have to tell it where the templates lived. This folder, templates, within the resources folder, is the default location for templates within your Spring Boot project. And so don't try to put templates elsewhere. Make sure they're in this templates folder so that the Spring Boot framework can find them. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing is that we just rendered a static template. So in a second, we'll look at how to pass data from the controller to the template. But just notice here that there wasn't any data passed between there, as we've seen in the past when we looked at MVC applications in Python. We'll learn to do that very soon. All right, and then I want to make one more change here before we look at data passing and a couple of other things in this lesson. And that is, this application is going to be one that we're going to work on for a little while and we're going to build out. So I want to go ahead and introduce some best practices around application structure so we can continue to integrate those into our work. So at the top of this controller class, I'm going to go ahead and give this a request mapping annotation. We talked about the fact that we can use this at the controller level to specify a base request path for every method within the controller. So that's what I want to do here. I just want to specify that every value here within request mapping configurations within every controller should be preceded with this. So I basically just changed the request path for my index method to be, rather than just previously where the request path was just slash, now it will be /cheese. That is the request path for this method. Okay. And then one more thing I want to do is, since this is no longer the index template or the index controller and template pair for the root of my website, I'm going to go ahead and refactor my templates a little bit. I'm going to go here in templates and right click and say new directory. And I'm going to make a new directory that corresponds specifically to templates for my cheese controller. Okay. And then I'm just going to move that index.html into that template, and this is all fine. And then finally, in order to get the correct template rendered here, I need to tell Spring Boot that I want it to go to the template cheese/index. So we just made 3 changes. We first added the request mapping prefix, essentially this URL prefix, so that every handler within our class must be preceded by this prefix for the routing to line up. We went and refactored our templates directory to make a directory specifically for templates that correspond to the cheese controller. And then we made sure that our one and only handler method was returning the name of that cheese controller properly as cheese/index. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. One thing I just noticed here is I'm not using this import from request body. It's a good thing to keep your code clean. So let's go ahead and remove that, and let's start up our application and make sure that everything still works at this new URL structure. Okay. So when we refresh, we get an error message, but that's okay because we removed any controllers that can respond to requests at the root. Let's go ahead and go to /cheese and make sure that we're there. And indeed, there we are. Okay, so again, good habit to use a request mapping annotation on your controller, not only on your each individual handler, but on the controller to say that each controller corresponds to a specific base URL segment. And it's a good thing to similarly organize your templates into separate files as well. Okay. Now, one thing about templates working with templates that's a little bit better than working with controllers is that we won't have to always restart our server when we make a template change. Recall from last time that every time we change Java code in our controller, we had to restart the server in order to see those changes reflected. So we need to do a little bit of work to get this so-called hot swapping enabled for templates, and I want to just do that now. So I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to make a configuration change. So let me stop the server to make this configuration change. Open up your build.gradle file, and just at the bottom here, go and add this simple segment. Add something called boot run. Recall that boot run was the Gradle target that we double clicked on to start our server. So this is essentially saying we're making a configuration change for that particular Gradle task. And here I want to say add resources equals true. Okay, so we're not going to really go into any depth about what this just did. It's just something that in conjunction with the DevTools dependency will allow IntelliJ to monitor the template files that we're working on, and when it sees a change to one of those template files, to deploy that change to the server while the server is still running. So that's essentially what we've done in making that change. So let's go ahead and see how that works. Fire up your application. And once it starts, pop back over to your browser. Okay, so we see that loaded. Let's go ahead and make a change to our template. And I don't know, we'll just make a little change to the H1. And I'm going to bounce back over, refresh, and we see that change was reflected immediately. Okay, so just a nice little trick there. And remember that if you still make changes to your Java code, you're still going to have to restart your server. But at least when we're working only in the templates, we can make changes and refresh and see those changes reflected immediately. Okay, and one more thing I want to do to conclude this first lesson in our exploration of Thymeleaf templates and views is to actually pass data into the view from the controller. So let's go back to IntelliJ, and we're going to change the controller here. So go ahead and stop your server and bounce back over to your controller. And what I want to do here is I want to modify this index method to just display a title message in the template. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a couple of changes to do that. The first thing I need to do is add a new parameter to this index method. So let me add the parameter model. So the type here is model with a capital M, and I'm going to need to import that. So you can Alt Enter or use your context menu to import that. And again, just something to note when you're getting used to IntelliJ, when you go to import a class, it will try to suggest classes that match the class that you're looking at. And here there are 3 different options that I could import. This will happen quite a bit, and it's possible for you to make the wrong choice. So just instead of just hitting enter and assuming that what's there is correct, just take a second to look at this and make sure that you're selecting the right one. So out of these 3 here, I see that 2 of them come out of Com, Sun, Tools, Internal. out of those packages, and one of them comes from the org Spring Framework package. Since we're working with Spring and we're dealing with a class called model that has to do with the web framework, it seems pretty obvious or pretty clear that the first one is likely correct. So go ahead and import that one. Indeed, all of the classes we're working with for the Spring Framework, or the vast majority of them, will be below the org Spring Framework package. And then once I have that model, I can use that model to pass data to the template or to the view. And the way that I do that is to say model.add attribute. And then this is going to take two parameters in the sense of a key value pair. So the first one is the key. I want to pass an attribute called title, and then I want to then create a string called title, which I haven't created yet, but let's go ahead and put it in there. That's going to be a local variable that will have the title of the page. Or actually, in this case, let's just go ahead and put the string right in there. So I want to pass in a string that's the title of my page, and I'm just going to use this first title we started with, my cheeses. Let me cut that out of there, and then I'll go over here, paste that in, and so I want that title to come from the controller in this case rather than from the view. Again, your views really shouldn't store any data about your application. In this case, the title of our page is going to be data about our application, and that's the work that we need to do in the controller to pass that data. So then how to get the title and render it into the view is something we need to bounce back over here and look at. So here we're going to introduce our first piece of Thymeleaf syntax. Okay, so go inside the h1 tag. So notice my cursor is just inside the bracket there, and make a space. And we're going to add a new HTML attribute, or a Thymeleaf attribute, and th:\text is the name of this attribute. And then we want to set that equal to something in quotes. So the format here follows similarly HTML attribute syntax. So th:\text equals, and then the syntax to pull a piece of data out of the data that's been passed to me from the controller is to say $, curly bracket, and then the name of that piece of data. So we named the attribute in our controller, we named the attribute title. Here, I'm going to use that same name, title, here to pull it out. And let me just go ahead and copy this and put it up in the title tag up here as well. Okay. Great, so let's go ahead and start up our application and see how we did. Okay, I'm going to refresh my browser. And we see that we did indeed get my cheeses there as the title. And it's pretty clear at this point that that did not come from the template itself. It came from the controller. So we correctly passed an attribute into the view that was then inserted into our HTML page that was returned. And one more thing I want to make a note about before we close out this lesson is just a neat feature of Thymeleaf. Thymeleaf is not just the syntax we're using, it is that, but it's also the rendering engine that's, the Java classes that render these templates into HTML pages within our application. And Thymeleaf itself is what's called a natural template language. So what that means is that when you're writing your Thymeleaf syntax, you're actually writing code that can be rendered as valid HTML. And a lot of template engines don't have that ability. So a nice feature of this is I can go to, if you kind of go up to the top right corner of your index.html, your template file here, go ahead and just click on the icon for your browser of choice. And you'll see that we opened up a page that is actually an HTML page. This is actually you can see the path there, or something that looks similar to the path to an actual file. So one thing I want to do is just show you that I can put something like default title in this page and save. Let's go ahead and go back and refresh, and I have the default title. So essentially you can build Thymeleaf templates in a static way and then gradually insert your dynamic components, the components that are pulling data from your application. And so that's nice because it allows you, in some sense, to kind of focus on just the markup and the HTML and CSS of your templates, apart from the application-oriented pieces, which is the actual Thymeleaf syntax that's pulling data and rendering it into your views. So once again, Thymeleaf templates are what are called natural templates because they have this nice sort of symbiosis with regular HTML. All right, so that's the basics of how to get Thymeleaf up and running in our application. We haven't done near that much in terms of showing you how to really use these to great effect to make interesting views and to do a lot of things that we're going to want to do. So that's the subject of the next 2 lessons.